Supposing that we wanted to design a neural network with animal-like capabilities in terms of its pattern recognition, autonomy, and decision-making to operate in an unconstrained environment for a mobile robot, what would be our choices? We could try and train a traditional EANN to do it, but we already know that these perform poorly in such unconstrained tasks. Newer, deep learning networks perform better in many respects, but still don't have a flexibility to respond well in such an open environment, and have to be designed and trained for each application. We could try and copy the biological brain, but the technology to do this is still in its infancy, and the complexity of a three-dimensional brain presently makes this impossible. In any case, the result is also restricted by the limitations and inefficiencies of biological neurology. And the simple truth is that we don't understand how it works anyway. So why not instead do what nature did and evolve an artificial brain? After all, the unguided hand of evolution created the most complex structure in the known universe, the human brain, without any plan or blueprint. Of course, evolutionary artificial neural networks have been around for a long time now, and people have tried to apply them to autonomous systems many times, but with somewhat limited success in unconstrained situations. One reason for this is that if we apply a simple evolutionary algorithm to a brain-sized system, the search space would be far too big, and it would take way too long to find any solutions. It's also highly questionable whether it would work anyway, as we know the biological brain is highly structured and modular, and the application of such a simple algorithm would not produce a modular result. So what was different about biological evolution which overcame these problems? The answer is that the brain evolved in stages or steps, and not all at once. And it evolved along with the organism's body and with an increase in complexity of the organism's environment. Simple animals have simple brains. As their descendants moved into new niches because the simpler earlier niches became filled with other organisms, more complex lifestyles and more complex brains evolved. The brains grew larger and their bodies grew more complex. And we can still see the remnants of this process in our own brains today. The deepest parts of our brain are called the brainstem and reptilian complex, and control our most basic needs like eating and breathing. On top of these developed later the limbic complex, which controls crude emotions. And finally, the most complex part of our brain, the thinking part, is the neocortex, where higher thought processes take place. These structures have built up over eons of time, like the layers of an onion. And it has been shown that genetic alterations and mutations from time to time allow new groups of neurons to become available for just such development. Even this, however, doesn't explain the modular structure of the nervous system. This came about because the development of the brain went hand in glove with the development of the organism's body plan, its senses, and its move to more challenging and complex environments. At each stage, modules of neurons appeared, building on top of older structures to fulfill these new functions. Just applying a standard evolutionary algorithm to an artificial version of this system doesn't work either, as each time the network is expanded, the algorithm still has to deal with the entire search space available, which includes retraining the previously added parts of the system to accommodate the new parts. The way around this is to fix the previously evolved structures in the system so that they stop evolving when the next new piece is added. This way, only the new pieces are trained and optimized, and not the previously added ones. The search space is therefore limited to the small new added pieces. This method automatically builds the network up in a modular fashion. To see how this works, let's take the simple example of a mobile robot. As a simple mechanical creature, it exists in a simple artificial environment, just like the simple biological creatures involved in theirs. This environment might consist, for example, of a light source, which gives it energy. The robot itself may consist of just a simple sensor to detect the presence of life and some primitive legs or wheels to move around. It's pretty straightforward to evolve a neural network using an evolutionary algorithm, which causes the robot to move about when it can't see the light and to stop and bask when it can. Once we can do this, we then proceed to do three things. Firstly, we freeze the evolved network so that it can't change its weights anymore. Although the networks which are going to evolve on top of it can use its signals and alter its behavior by using their own outputs. Secondly, we either make the environment or the robot's body plan slightly more complex, or both, but we must be careful not to give it too difficult a task to evolve next. And finally, we add new neurons on top of the old ones and allow it to train for the new situation. The gradual increase of complexity in the robot's environment or its body is called deconstraint. We say that we have deconstrained the system. For example, we might allow the robot's eye or sensor to become slightly more complex, so that it can, for example, ascertain the direction in which light is coming from. Or perhaps we could allow its legs to develop a new movable joint. Either way, providing that the deconstraint is small enough, the network will be able to handle it and learn to take care of this new situation and produce an optimal result. The procedure then repeats itself. This time around, perhaps we can add some obstacles to the robot's environment and introduce more pixels into the eye to allow their detection and avoidance. Or perhaps we could add some further complexity to the limbs or another pair of legs. This is a slow process, but it's biologically sound. Evolution happened via a series of small steps and incremental alterations. Eventually, from small beginnings, complex systems build. In my team's work on these systems, we found a few important rules which need to be followed in order for the system to work and evolve properly. Firstly, the neurons used in the added modules must be flexible enough for the task. Secondly, the added networks must be big enough, that is, have enough neurons to fulfill the task. Thirdly, the evolutionary algorithm which configures the new added modules must be able to not only train the weights, but also configure their connection pattern in order for the added network to fulfill its purpose. Fourthly, the deconstraint at each stage must be small enough for the new network to handle. The first three of these are just another way of saying that the network which is added must be flexible enough to configure itself for the job. We managed quite quickly to grow a network of neurons which controlled a four-legged, complex mobile robot similar to that which was described above. A complete set of papers describing this system has been published, and one is listed in the video description below as a good starting point for further reading. There are many other applications of incremental evolutionary growth, or IEG as I'll call it, beyond that illustrated above. For example, it can be used to grow an existing human-designed system by augmenting it and growing a neural network around it. It can also be used with other non-neural systems, like mechanical or electronic systems. Some examples of this are illustrated in the papers referenced below. Indeed, one could argue that a system just like this is responsible for most of modern computing, as complex programs like operating systems are now often developed in just this way, with old code underlying newer modules added on top by more recent programmers. It needs to be acknowledged also that there are still some lessons to be learned and problems to be solved with this sort of system, however. For example, should previously evolved networks be allowed to evolve slightly when new ones are added on top? Or what about very large networks? Where do we add the new modules and where do we connect them? However, none of these issues are unsurmountable. They are just engineering challenges, and you will find a discussion of them in the paper listed below.